You were never designed for this. Your brain, your instincts, your emotional wiring, they weren't built for cities, deadlines, infinite scrolling, or optimizing your LinkedIn profile. They were built for surviving the wild, for spotting threats in the dark, for keeping the tribe alive. Every fear you carry, every craving, every deep need to belong, it all traces back to a time when exile meant death and attention meant survival. But here's the catch. The system knows this. It's not broken, it's efficient. It doesn't fail because it's disorganized. It thrives because it understands you better than you understand yourself. It hijacks your most primal programming and uses it against you. Your need to be seen, monetized. Your fear of falling behind, marketed. Your instincts to protect, submit, obey, rebel, connect, dominate. They're not private battles. They're public assets, tools, levers, hooks. And you wonder why you're tired, why you keep chasing things you never really wanted, why everything feels off even when life looks fine. You were designed for something else, but this machine figured out how to recode you. If you're already feeling the unease, hit like. If you're starting to connect dots, subscribe. And if this makes you uncomfortable, share it with someone who's ready to feel that too. Let's dig deeper into how it all works and why you keep waking up exhausted in a world that's supposedly built for convenience. You wake up and reach for your phone before you even sit up. Within seconds, your brain is processing faces, headlines, updates, alarms, promotions, opinions, and ads, all before you've had water. You're reacting before you're thinking. You're scanning for threats and rewards like a deer twitching in tall grass. Except you're not in a forest, you're in a system. The first lie modern life tells you is that you're in control. But if your attention is pulled, your emotions triggered, and your time scheduled before you've made a single conscious decision, who's really in charge? Let's go back. 200,000 years ago, your ancestors lived in tight-knit groups of about 100 people. Everyone knew everyone. Status was local. Resources were shared. Survival depended on collaboration, not competition. Your brain evolved under pressure to stay connected, alert, and accepted. Rejection wasn't embarrassing. It was fatal. Fast forward to now, you live in a concrete hive of 10 million strangers. Your attention is fractured across screens. You're exposed to thousands of faces and thousands of judgments every day, and your tribal wiring is melting under the load. And here's the thing. The architects of the modern world know this. They didn't stumble into your psychology. They studied it. They know that if they overload your social circuits, you'll get anxious. If they give you too many options, you'll freeze. If they dangle validation just out of reach, you'll chase it harder. Your pain isn't a bug. It's a business model. Ever wonder why you're addicted to notifications? Why it feels so good to get a like? That's not random. It's neurochemical warfare. Every time you get a ping, your brain gets a drip of dopamine, the same chemical that makes slot machines irresistible. These aren't just features, they're exploits, built by design. And don't assume it's just social media. This shows up in your workplace too. Meetings, metrics, promotions, emails sent at 11:42 p.m. just to prove you're on top of it. Hustle culture isn't ambition, it's survival response. You're stuck in a maze designed to make you mistake exhaustion for virtue. Why do you keep agreeing to terms of service you didn't read? Why do you let your job define your value? Why do you feel guilty resting? Because you're not lazy, you're cornered. This system trains you to doubt stillness, to fear boredom, to self-police your every move. You're not failing to adapt, you're adapting too well, but to a machine that only values your output. And that's the cruelest part. The better you adapt, the more invisible the cage becomes. Some people try to solve this by doubling down. They optimize, track, biohack, productivity hack, journal, meditate with an app that sells their data. But that's just rearranging furniture inside the prison. What this really demands is awareness. Ask yourself, why do you feel safer scrolling than sitting with your thoughts? Why does silence make you uncomfortable? Why does unplugging feel like losing something? That discomfort, That's the sound of ancient instincts misfiring in modern conditions. You were built to protect your tribe, hunt your food, raise your children, and pass on stories. But now your tribe is strangers online. Your food is processed. Your kids are on tablets, and your stories come in 30-second bursts designed to disappear. You're not living wrong. You're living inside something that profits when you feel like something's missing. And the longer you stay plugged in without question, the more those instincts mutate. You start to measure self-worth by productivity. You start to associate love with attention. You start to equate comfort with safety and boredom with failure. That's not growth, that's conditioning. The first step isn't escape, it's recognition. Until you realize you're being fed instincts that aren't yours, you keep mistaking stimulation for purpose and burnout for passion. The system isn't broken, it's operating exactly as designed. And unless you start seeing how it rewires your wiring, you'll keep blaming yourself for feeling so damn tired.
You don't crave luxury. You crave belonging. That's the twist no ad will ever admit. No brand will say it out loud. But they all know it. They know your biology better than you do, and they know how to make it dance. Every brand, every ideology, every movement, every influencer promising a better life. They're not offering you products, they're offering you tribe, and you're wired to say yes. Let's zoom out. In the ancestral world, your status in the tribe determined your safety. If people trusted you, you survived. If you were liked, supported, and seen, you had a place around the fire. If not, you were out, alone, vulnerable. That's a death sentence. So your brain evolved to do two things. 1. Scan constantly for threats to belonging. 2. Adapt rapidly to whatever behavior earns you acceptance. But what happens when that wiring meets modern capitalism? Here's what. You start confusing purchases with protection. You start seeing followers as friends. You start measuring identity in brands, apps, groups, and hashtags. Belonging used to be about safety. Now it's about signaling. And that shift makes you manipulatable as hell. When Nike sells you a sneaker, they're not selling foam and fabric. They're selling the story. This is what winners wear. Apple isn't selling glass and silicon. They're selling status without trying too hard. Patagonia isn't selling jackets. They're selling virtue. And when someone drops 5 figures on a handbag, they're not paying for leather. They're buying access to a tribe where wealth equals worth. You don't want stuff. You want proof that you belong. And the system knows it. It knows that if it can trigger your fear of exclusion, it can steer your behavior, subtly, painlessly, relentlessly. Let's get more uncomfortable. This isn't just about corporations. Political movements do the same thing. So do ideologies. So do wellness influencers, tech cults, and self-help brands. The moment someone says, people like us do things like this, they're offering you tribe. And your nervous system lights up. Finally, I'm safe. Finally, I'm one of them. Finally, I don't have to figure this out alone. But here's the thing. Most of these modern tribes aren't real. They don't protect you. They don't know you. They don't even see you. They just use your loyalty. They exploit the part of you that's terrified of standing alone, that wants to be liked, aligned, and accepted, that wants the badge, the language, the inside jokes, the uniform. Look at the language you hear every day. We're not like those people. Join the movement. This community gets it. Only real ones will understand. That's tribal mimicry. They're mimicking the emotional safety of ancient belonging to sell you identity while extracting attention, money, or obedience in return. It works because you're lonely. You're overexposed, yet underconnected. You've got 1,000 digital acquaintances and no one you'd call in a real crisis. So when a group says, "We see you," Your brain clings to it like oxygen, even if that group is toxic, even if it demands your money, your outrage, your conformity, even if it doesn't actually care about you beyond your usefulness. That's how you get radicalized, slowly, invisibly, not through facts, but through identity need. You adopt the lingo, you post the memes, you echo the values, even if they're not yours, because nonconformity feels like exile, and your nervous system panics at that. So you keep reshaping yourself, not to grow, but not to be left out. And you start confusing connection with visibility. You post more, share more, signal more, until you're more brand than person, a walking algorithm of what your tribe expects from you. The tragedy? Most of the people playing this game feel just as alone. They're all pretending not to be scared, not to be confused, not to be constantly checking whether they still belong. But under the surface, it's all performance. Because that's what happens when tribal instincts meet mass media. You get infinite imitation and almost no intimacy. Real belonging doesn't trend. It doesn't demand performance. It doesn't require the right hashtags or the perfect aesthetic or a loyalty test every 5 minutes. But the system doesn't reward real belonging. It rewards visible alignment. Think about it. You can be totally disconnected from yourself, your values, your community, and still rack up likes, sales, and praise, as long as you look the part. That's not community. That's costume. And deep down, you know it. You know that you've posted things you didn't believe in just to stay on the right side of the feed. You've kept quiet when something felt off just to avoid backlash. You've copied language you didn't understand just to sound like you belong. Because the fear of exclusion is louder than the voice of your conscience. And that's the point. The system isn't trying to kill you. It's trying to tame you, to mold you into a predictable, performing, compliant piece of the machine. You think you're rebelling by buying edgy brands, but they already predicted that. They built the product for your rebellion, wrapped it in faux authenticity, and charged you triple. Because if they can shape your identity, they don't need to control your actions directly. They just watch you do it to yourself. You curate your own cage. You pay for your own leash, and you defend it because it feels like home. Let that sink in. You can be completely exploited and still feel like you chose it. Because the moment the system hijacks your need to belong, you'll protect it like it's family. So ask yourself, what have you pledged allegiance to just to feel safe? What tribe have you joined at the cost of your integrity? And are you living your truth, or just repeating the script that gets the most applause?
Let's go back to the beginning. You weren't born obsessed with money. You were born obsessed with connection, with belonging, safety, love. But somewhere along the way, you learned that those things could be taken from you. And worse, that you might not have the power to stop it. That's where identity fractures. That's where powerlessness roots itself in your nervous system. And from that moment forward, money stops being a tool. It becomes a shield, a way to build distance between you and the next abandonment, the next humiliation, the next time you're made to feel invisible. But here's where it gets darker. You start to confuse money with identity. This doesn't happen all at once. It creeps in over time. You get praised for being productive. You get rewarded when you perform. You notice that people listen more when you have something to offer. So you start performing all the time. You start turning yourself into a product, marketable, useful, desirable. Not because you're proud, because you're scared. Scared that if you're not useful, you're disposable. And so you build a version of yourself around being financially relevant. You call it success. But underneath, is a scared kid who learned to monetize his own value before he even learned how to trust it. This is the heart of what psychologists call conditional worth. You only feel okay when you're producing, earning, advancing. Your identity becomes performance dependent, which means it's never truly safe. Because if your worth is tied to how much you make or how much you do, then rest feels like death. And rest is what your body actually needs. Now take that mindset and plug it into capitalism. You get an identity economy where people build their self-worth around productivity metrics, where you can't slow down because slowness feels like slipping, where your calendar becomes your self-esteem and your inbox feels like a scoreboard. Let's go deeper. The modern economy doesn't just exploit labor, it exploits insecurity. It thrives on your need to prove yourself. It sells you products not to make you whole, but to confirm that you aren't whole yet. It makes sure you stay in a loop of becoming, achieving, upgrading, because the second you feel like you're enough, you stop spending. You're not a customer. You're an unresolved emotion with a credit card. And the system knows this. It's why ads don't just show you products, they show you identities. They show you who you'll get to become if you buy in. Confident, respected, powerful, and most of all, safe from rejection. That's the quiet promise under everything. Money will make people respect you. Money will insulate you from humiliation. Money will rewrite your past. It won't, but that doesn't matter, because the emotional imprint was already made long ago, and your adult self is still trying to rescue the child that got dismissed, laughed at, abandoned. You think you're building wealth. What you're actually building is armor, and that armor gets heavier over time. Here's where it gets even more dangerous. If you spend long enough tying your identity to money, power, and performance, you lose the ability to feel anything outside of it. Joy becomes rare. Rest feels undeserved. Relationships become transactional, even if you don't mean for them to be, because you've wired yourself to see the world through a filter of value extraction. If something can't be leveraged, it feels useless. Even love starts to feel inefficient. This is why so many high performers feel empty. They're not broken. They're just exhausted from living inside a value system that treats vulnerability like weakness, that turns human experience into ROI, that only validates what it can monetize. You become a brand of yourself, and it's lonely as hell. Because when your identity is built around what you can do, the part of you that just is, the quiet, curious, messy, contradictory part, never gets a seat at the table. You become invisible to yourself, a ghost running a business. That's the cost of over-identifying with success. You don't just lose touch with your past, you lose access to your future, because every choice you make is shaped by the fear of becoming nobody again. Let's pause. Think about your goals, your 5-year plan, your vision board if you have one. Now strip away every goal that's secretly about gaining approval, escaping shame, or proving someone wrong. What's left? That's the beginning of your real life. Everything else was a trauma echo. Now, none of this means ambition is bad, or that wanting wealth is shameful. But when ambition is built on the foundation of unresolved identity wounds, it becomes self-cannibalizing. It eats you alive while pretending to empower you. You say you want to be free, but if your entire self-worth is built around being irreplaceable, you've just built a golden cage. The bars are just made of praise, status, and performance. Still a cage. And the scariest part? You don't even know who you'd be without it. That's what keeps people stuck, not a lack of knowledge, not laziness, but the terror of identity collapse. Because if you stop chasing the version of success that's kept you feeling safe, what's left? Who are you, really? That's the real fear. Not poverty, not failure. Irrelevance. And it's not your fault. The system taught you that being someone meant being valuable in someone else's economy. So now anything that doesn't feed the performance loop feels like a threat. But here's the crack in the illusion. You're not your productivity. You're not your net worth. You're not your LinkedIn bio. You're a human being whose first experience of power was the lack of it. And you've been trying to make up for that ever since. But here's the thing about trauma. It doesn't get healed through domination. It gets healed through integration. Through the terrifying act of being yourself, even when it's not impressive. Even when it's not profitable. Even when it's quiet. Because real wealth isn't what you can flex, it's what you can afford to feel without falling apart. And that brings us to the next trap. When you finally make it, why does the emptiness still show up?
Fear isn't the side effect. It's the strategy. The system doesn't want you terrified. That's too messy. It wants you uneasy, on edge, just anxious enough to keep moving, spending, obeying, and second-guessing yourself. Fear, soft, invisible, chronic fear, is the engine that keeps the whole thing running. Let's start with this. You were built to respond to real threats. A rustle in the bushes, a predator in the dark, a rival with a knife. In those moments, fear was clarity. It was focus. It sharpened your senses and said, survive now, feel later. But now, you live in a world where your survival instinct is triggered 100 times a day by things that can't kill you, but feel like they might. Late rent, ghosted texts, algorithm changes, the look on your boss's face, a comment on your post, the number of views you didn't get. None of these will end your life, but your brain doesn't know that. It still treats every social rejection, every financial threat, every potential exile from the tribe as if it were a lion. This is how the system controls you. Not with cages, with alarms. It keeps you worried about what you might lose. Your job, your relevance, your access, your image, your stability. And here's the brutal irony. The more you achieve, the more you fear losing it. The better your life looks, the more scared you get, because the system taught you to climb, not to feel safe at the top. You're always one step from falling off. One scandal, one market crash, one bad take, one wrong word. So you keep performing, keep apologizing, keep upgrading, keep obeying the shifting rules because fear has turned you into your own warden. And it's not just personal, it's collective. Entire societies are run on this ambient fear. Fear of being replaced, fear of falling behind, fear of being irrelevant, unchosen, unseen. Politicians use it. News cycles run on it. Corporations bank on it. Watch a commercial sometime. Pay attention. It doesn't show you a product. It shows you a fear. And then a way out. Your skin isn't smooth enough. Your house isn't clean enough. Your job isn't prestigious enough. Your body isn't sexy enough. But this cream, this course, this kitchen appliance, this mindset hack, it'll fix that. It's not marketing. It's psychological blackmail. You're constantly told you're not enough. But you could be if you just bought, obeyed, aligned. Even wellness culture isn't immune. It just repackages fear as self-improvement.
You're not anxious because of a toxic system. You're anxious because you don't journal enough. You're not burned out because of inhumane work hours. You're just not drinking the right green juice. You're not tired because you're exploited. You just need a better morning routine. See how slick that is? It turns your suffering into a personal failure. and then sells you a solution that never ends. You stay scared. You stay hooked. You stay working on yourself forever. But fear does something deeper than just sell you stuff. It breaks your ability to think clearly. Fear narrows attention. It pushes you into short-term decisions, into tribal loyalty, into clinging to whatever group, identity, or narrative makes you feel a little safer in a world that keeps shaking the floor under your feet. That's why fear is so politically powerful. It makes people pick sides. It makes them justify cruelty. It makes them abandon nuance. Because when you feel unsafe, you'll believe almost anything that promises certainty. It doesn't have to be true. It just has to be comforting. But comfort built on fear is not peace. It's sedation. That's what you're being offered every day. Not clarity, not freedom, just sedation. Temporary relief from the gnawing feeling that something's wrong. Scroll more, buy more, work more, numb more. And above all, don't stop moving. Because stillness is dangerous. Stillness lets the fear speak. And if you listen to it long enough, you might hear the truth. The truth that your fear isn't weakness. It's intelligence, trapped in a system that feeds on your confusion. You're afraid for a reason, afraid because something is off, afraid because your instincts, deep down, still know what safety should feel like. And this isn't it. You were supposed to fear lions. Now you fear inboxes. You fear being misunderstood. You fear falling behind on a treadmill no one asked you to run. And the cruelest part? That fear keeps you docile. When you're scared, you're easier to manage, easier to sell to, easier to manipulate, easier to exhaust until you stop asking questions. The system doesn't care if you feel empowered, as long as you stay dependent. And that's what fear guarantees: dependence. You become dependent on whatever soothes it: the job, the feed, the ideology, the pill, the guru. Not because it heals you, but because it silences the panic just long enough to function. But what if you didn't run from that fear? What if you sat with it, really sat, and asked, what am I actually afraid of? Whose voice is this? What part of me is trying to survive, and what part of me is finally ready to stop performing safety and start building it for real? Because that's what no one tells you. Fear doesn't mean you're broken. It means something's not right. And sometimes the fear isn't the problem. It's the signal. A flare from your ancient wiring saying, this isn't safety. This is submission. And if you ignore that signal long enough, you don't just lose clarity. You lose yourself.
You didn't give in. You were trained to. You weren't born compliant. You were made that way, by repetition, by reward, by the slow erosion of resistance. Not through violence, but through conditioning. Quiet, consistent, almost invisible. So let's get something straight. Your obedience isn't a moral failure. It's a biological adaptation. From the moment you could speak, you were being shaped. Sit still, be nice, don't question adults, raise your hand, follow the rules, memorize, regurgitate, forget. Stay within the lines. And every time you complied, you were rewarded. Praise, approval, a gold star. Every time you resisted, even for the right reasons, you were punished. Shame, detention, silence, isolation. So you learned not to think, but to scan for what would keep you safe. That wasn't education. That was behavioral programming. And it worked. You learned how to speak when spoken to. You learned which opinions are safe. You learned when to nod and when to stay silent. You learned how to play the role. Not because it felt right, but because it hurt less than the alternative. So by the time you hit adulthood, obedience felt natural. Questioning authority felt dangerous. Stillness felt lazy. Anger felt immature. And silence, true silence, felt like failure. But here's the twist. The system doesn't need to fight you if it can train you to fight yourself. That's the brilliance of it. It installs a voice in your head, your inner critic, that keeps you in check long after the teachers, parents, and bosses are gone. You internalize the system. You carry it around like a parasite wearing your voice. You start punishing yourself for being tired. You shame yourself for needing rest. You compare yourself to strangers online and call it motivation. You beat yourself up for not achieving enough, even though no one ever defined what enough is. And you think that voice is you. But it's not. It's a recording, a loop, a leftover script from a system that taught you compliance equals safety. The truth? It doesn't. It equals predictability. Because predictable people don't disrupt. They don't question. They don't walk away. They stay on the treadmill, smiling, producing, apologizing for needing air. Let's talk about shame. Shame is the glue that holds obedience together. You're not just afraid of failing. You're afraid of being seen failing. You're afraid of looking lazy, looking weak, looking weird. Because if you stand out too much, someone might exile you, fire you, cancel you, abandon you. Your brain still believes you need the tribe to survive, so you'll do almost anything to avoid shame, even betray yourself. You'll say yes when you want to scream no. You'll laugh when you feel disgust. You'll agree just to keep the peace. You'll hide your truth because someone once taught you that being liked is more important than being real. That's not cowardice. That's survival instinct. And that's why this system is so stable. It doesn't run on force. It runs on internalized surveillance. You become your own enforcer, your own censor, your own handler. You feel the urge to speak out and stop yourself. You feel the urge to rest and guilt yourself. You feel the urge to break away and convince yourself to wait just a little longer, because that voice says, don't be selfish, don't be dramatic, don't ruin what you've built. But what have you built really? A life that looks good from the outside but feels hollow inside? A version of yourself that earns approval but can't breathe? You weren't born to be this cautious. You were taught. And every time you obeyed, every time you traded truth for safety, you added another layer of armor. And now it's heavy. Now it's hard to move. Now you don't even know what's you and what's costume. And if you try to strip it away, the shame flares up. The doubt kicks in. The fear of being too much or not enough claws at your gut. That's not a sign you're wrong. That's a sign you're close to the truth. Because the moment you stop complying, the system panics. It throws guilt at you. It flashes consequences. It whispers, don't be stupid, be grateful, be realistic. Realistic means stay useful, stay silent, stay sedated. But you don't need more discipline. You don't need more goals. You don't need to optimize your life into a spreadsheet of fake happiness. You need to unlearn. Unlearn the script. Unlearn the fear. Unlearn the voice that says you're only valuable when you're producing, pleasing, performing. You weren't born compliant. You were coerced, slowly, cleverly, with just enough sugar to make the poison go down. But now you see the pattern. You hear the voice, and you can interrupt the loop. Not with rage, not with rebellion, with awareness. Because the moment you see the leash, you can choose whether to wear it.
Here's the trap. Most people who think they've escaped the system
are still just reacting to it. They're chasing financial freedom, social status, or some aesthetic version of rebellion, still plugged into the same feedback loop, just wearing different clothes. Real escape doesn't look like running away. It looks like seeing the game for what it is and refusing to play it blindly. The system thrives on unconscious participation. It doesn't care if you're angry, spiritual, entrepreneurial, or politically radical, as long as you're predictable. If it can count on your attention, your spending, your fear, or even your defiance, it wins. What this really means is the most subversive thing you can do is pause, think, sit with discomfort instead of numbing it, create instead of consume. Stop mistaking impulse for identity. You don't need to burn it all down. You just need to stop feeding it with your instincts. The system isn't broken. It's working exactly as intended. But you don't have to be.